Hey, Svitlana,
Hello, Arnie.
you're looking great. You did something with your hair.
Yeah, something different today.
Yeah, that's good. So, when it is minus 16 degree, what I just learned in Canada, you'd probably stay home and do something with your hair every now and then.
Yeah, we had so much snow. It was until up to my waist around yesterday.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. At the moment, there is a little bit of a chess tournament happening. It's the Tata Steel chess. Are you following it a little bit, or is it difficult with the times, time
No, I was
wise?
going to, I check the results from time to time,
Hmm.
but I haven't had the chance to look at some of the games. But I do see the big things happening. G4, I saw.
Yes, exactly.
That I saw.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's yeah. I thought of a couple of players who are playing against me every now and then. And maybe this looks familiar, but that variation with the G4 from Ahmediyarov is actually makes more sense. But after all, we will talk about chess, some smart moves. What have you prepared for us today?
hmm Can you see the screen?
I can see the screen loud and clear.
Okay. Okay, great. So I thought today we would talk about one of the key positional concepts in chess, which is the idea of prophylaxis. Have you heard that word before?
I have. I know little to nothing about this, but as a funny matter of fact, I was just filming with Dr. Carsten Müller because of
hmm
his. Here, let me show you. Of his four-player type
hmm
model, the human factor.
Oh,
So
I do have this book, I think, from him.
yeah, that could be,
Yeah, he
yes.
gave it to me.
Exactly. So the Fritz trainer is out,
hmm
and we're the English people do not know too much about it, but and that's the fun fact and why I'm mentioning it. Lars Bo Hansen is the player who actually is the originator of this whole system in 2005. He made this player profiles or this standard profiles for the players and this human factor.
Uh-huh.
And Carsten Müller and Louis Engel, German grandmaster, they took off of this. So now I see him with Vasily Ivanchuk, who is clearly how do you call it? An activist player. Like he's a very active player with a lot of sacrifices and beautiful. And Lars
Mhm.
Bohansen is a theorist player. There we go. So that was just yeah. So I'm
Yeah, you just
enjoying
saw
this
the names of
already.
who's playing this
Yes.
game. Yeah. Yeah, so do you have an idea of what prophylaxis means?
To prepare for a certain variation or follow up of moves, maybe to put the pieces in the right position.
Okay, so it's kind of in that direction, but we can describe it in many different ways.
Okay.
It was it was first proposed by Nimzovich, the whole concept, and he defined it as carrying out your own plans with simultaneous counteractions against the opponent's ideas.
Okay, that sounds
And yeah,
far
you can
better than
also
what I
add
said.
that it's taking measures preventing something which is undesirable for you from a positional point of view. So
Gotcha.
something along those lines would be how people view prophylaxis. He wasn't the only one. Dvoretsky also has talked a lot about it in his books. He even wrote a book that's called Recognizing Your Opponent's Resources.
Sorry,
And
what was that? Can you repeat?
recognizing your
Ah,
opponent's resources,
okay.
which could be, a synonym basically of the word prophylaxis
Hmm.
itself. So yeah, it's a very important concept in positional chess and just in um, understanding your own plans and your opponent's plans in general.
Can I
So
can I give like is it for example if there is a mate on the last row or a last or second rank mate or no last rank mate and then you'd play h3 to prevent this? Is this like the very
so this
simplified form?
That is very close. The deeper idea of prophylaxis would be you playing h3 when there's no mate yet, like there's no mate threatened yet, but you have some variations, like you calculate some variations and you see that in some lines there's this unpleasant check on the back rank, which is why before you carry out your big calculations and big plans, you play h3 as a waiting move, and you make sure that this idea of your opponent doesn't work out. So it's basically this, but in a deeper sense.
I understand. Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay.
So we can start with the examples, and you're going to see how it applies. So we have this position here right now, and we're going to look at it from white side, and try to think about what black would do if it was his move. What are his problems, and what would you consider playing as white?
Okay, so black's problems are that the white pieces are quite nice and active, especially the pawns on B and C are moving a bit forward. The knight is attacked. There's, of course, the bishop pointing to the queen. So sometimes I'm missing the words in German. How is it?
Pinned?
It's pinned. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in this second I recognized it. So, but at least there's the open file on the A rank. I mean, yeah, but overall I think white is in a better position.
Right. So what are the moves that come to mind?
Okay, so first of all, we have to get rid of this pin, in my opinion. And then we...
Well, you're playing as white. Are you trying to get rid of it for black?
Oh, as white. I thought for black.
No, we're playing as white.
Okay, so, well, then I would concentrate even more power on the pin. So, for example, rook to e1 would be an idea I have. Then again, maybe I could just use this advantage that the knight cannot move. But then again, we're talking about prophylaxis today. Mm-hmm. So there's always the move, which is a check if the knight moves away. And at the very moment, if the queen wouldn't take the knight on f3, then black would just win a piece. So maybe...
They wouldn't win a piece because we capture back with
exactly,
the
queen. If the queen wouldn't take back. So this is something to keep in mind. So maybe because of the theme today, a move like king h1 could be something to play.
Exactly. So this is what was played in the game, and it's a prime example of what prophylactic thinking looks like. So you look at the aspects of the position, you realize that this pin is something really, really strong right now and something we can focus on. And naturally, you can think of moves like rook e1. It makes a lot of sense. Then, once you calculate rook e1, as you correctly pointed out, black will be able to take on f3 with check. We are not going to lose a piece. We'll take back with the queen. But then e5, and black has quite a strong center, and it looks like he solved pretty much all of his problems.
True.
Same thing if you do something different. If you just do something in a completely different direction, then on the next move he can get rid of the pin and not really have such big problems anymore with his queen placement. So this is why king h1, once you look through other variations and you see how in a lot of them, the problem is that black gets rid of the pin with knight f3 check, you can arrive to this move, which prevents the idea of knight f3 check without ruining any aspects of your position and keeping all the threats intact. So king h1 is exactly what has been played. Then black played knight to c6, and well, the prophylaxis part of it is sort of nearing its end, but what do you think the idea would be now? Do you see any way to sort of open up this position to your advantage?
Yeah, I think... well, we could take the knight on c6 and then push forward.
There's many good ways.
With c4 maybe. We could also get the rook to e1 again. Something
exactly. You pretty much named all of the good moves. c4 and rook e1, they're fairly similar. In the game, c4 has been played, which which has been included for the purpose of opening up this diagonal.
Yeah.
And for now, it doesn't seem like like a significant diagonal to open. But the point is that anytime that white attacks the piece, black has to play f6, or else it's going to be attacked too many times. So this is why you do c4 in anticipating that f6 it will follow up soon, and you can attack it on the next move. And after queen e2, already white is in a very good shape. It's pretty much a winning position because the piece activity is just too strong for white. And it ended soon after, when the c pawn just became a really strong piece, and the knight on a5 is just very ugly and completely out of play.
Yeah.
He ended up there were a few more moves, but white already has a healthy passed pawn, and it was a fairly simple win after that. So what I wanted to highlight with this first introductory example was basically the thinking process behind prophylactic thinking. So I think it's Dvoretsky, and I'm sure many other people in his books also give this process, but there's a few questions that you can always ask yourself before making a move, such as, well, this is also what you're taught very, very early on, but it's something that I find you often forget to ask yourself when you play. So it's these things like, what is my opponent's idea? What would he do if it was his move? What's his general plan of action? So first of all, figuring out what the opponent tries to do. Second, you try to figure out, is there anything wrong with his last move? Is there a drawback to whatever was his previous move? And there's I think another book which describes this prophylactic thinking a bit, and it talks about the drawback principle. Have you heard of that one before?
I probably heard of this before, but I also wouldn't know exactly what to do with it. So I'm learning something new right now.
Right. Well, the drawback principle is pretty simple. It's essentially just thinking about what is the drawback of what can be the drawback of my opponent's move or my own move. So whenever you make a move, you want to make sure that the positives of the move outweigh the negatives of the move. So of course, no move can be absolutely perfect. There's always a reason why we play a move, and there's always a reason why we reject moves. So the drawback principle is sort of, you want to keep the percentage of the good things about your move outweighing the drawbacks of your move. Okay. And this works for your own moves and for your opponent's moves as well. So yeah, those are sort of the questions that we're going to be asking throughout. What is my opponent's idea? Is there anything wrong with his last move, or what is the idea behind his last move? And yeah, we just want to be aware of his perspective on the position, and then try to incorporate it with our own plan, and make sure we're going towards our own goals by also preventing the opponent's ideas. Okay, so I have this next position which came out of the opening, and it's sort of a typical pawn structure, I think, even though this didn't come from the Grunfeld, but it looks very close to the Grunfeld pawn structure.
Okay.
Yeah, so based on so I put a few moves earlier than the position that I wanted to give, just to show how we can ask ourselves these questions right from the start. So bishop g5, whatever, it's a developing move, we're still close to the opening, and a6. So based on this move and the general plans of this pawn structure, what do you think black is trying to accomplish?
Based on this move, well, once d5 is moving forward for white, then black can take back with the c pawn without thinking too much about losing the b pawn shortly after, maybe.
Okay.
That's an idea I have.
That can be one thing.
Yeah.
He is also trying to do something more direct.
Okay. Well, What could that be? Weird move, a6. I mean, I guess it's theory.
I just think it's because you don't play these pawn structures. It's a
Maybe.
very typical thing to do.
How funny. Yeah. Well, to just play c5, I guess.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's the whole
Okay.
idea. You just
Gotcha.
want to make sure that b5 isn't hanging
Yeah.
in most of the lines, and you want to try to play c5 later on. So you
Okay.
mentioned d5, and I don't think d5 is something that white particularly wants to play in these situations, because this whole bishop opens up,
Probably not. No.
and I think black would be fairly happy if d5 ever occurred. So this is how, based on the movie, even if you're, let's say, in an unknown opening, so you haven't played this before, but even just based on this move, you can sort of figure out what the opponent's ideas are and what he's trying to accomplish. So based on this, what do you think you would play for white?
d5. No, just kidding. Maybe we can play bishop e3.
Bishop e3. Well, the bishop just went to g5, and now it's coming back to e3.
Just always countering every plan. What could we do? Well, we could play a4.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. A4 is a good way to keep the pressure on b5 and make sure that black has to think twice before playing c5. So what you did with your first move was more, how do you say, you were preparing for when c5 does happen, you know, but by playing a4, you're more making sure that it doesn't happen, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, of course, totally, yeah. And it's that's a much stronger move after all, because for a lot of reasons.
For the next little bit, black still try to carry on with the plan of playing c5. So when an opponent plays a move like rook c8, you can already guess that he's probably trying to push for c5. So many moves are good here, but what would try to think of some that would prevent black's idea. So why is his rook standing on c8, and what is the goal?
Well, of course, c5 is going to be pushed
and it's not
forward.
just c5. It's also the fact that the queen is standing here on the c file, so that whenever c5 does happen, he is now threatening to take here, and it would be impossible for us to take back.
Being able to take back. Okay, so how about... Okay, how can we prevent this now? Maybe we just pull the queen away. Maybe we just place it to b2, so it also has control on d4, but actually it's not necessary, and it would be in another pin. From one pin to another. So how about d2?
Okay, so I do think there's a lot of good moves with the queen. Queen d2, probably one of the best ones. In the game queen e2 was played, I don't think it makes a huge difference. Queen e2 is just hitting the b5 pawn an extra time, which also makes sense. Queen d2 has its own ideas, so I would also like that move. So I think both of what you have mentioned was right. So in case you would have said something completely different, so for example, playing a move like rook d1. So this would be a sign that white is just completely not paying attention to black's idea. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that, white is going to be worse, but you're just giving black a bit more counterplay than you could have given. So then this whole tactic with the pawn on c5 happening, and yes, you can win another pawn, but the c3 pawn will be
unpleasant,
will be weak later, and there's many things to calculate here, and suddenly it gets risky. So this is why such a move like queen e2 or queen d2, as you said, it just gets rid of that idea, and we let the opponent think about a new plan and what he's going to do next. So queen e2, knight b6 was played, bringing the knight to c4 potentially in the future, and of course attacking the a4 pawn. Then we play. Then
Then we
Grachev,
give
the
him
player with white,
free
played bishop
entrance.
c2. Hmm?
Then now we give the white free entrance. We invite the
Yeah,
knight to go to c4, literally.
exactly. He can go if he wants. But the idea is that we didn't want to release the tension right away with capturing.
Mhm.
And we didn't really want to play a5 either, because once again that releases the tension, and then a5 can potentially be weak in the future. So we want to keep things as they are, and this is why bishop c2 I think is a very logical move, and we're protecting a4,
Interesting.
and for now he can't really take it, or else the pawn structure will be ruined pretty much.
Mhm.
So queen c7, and with his last move, basically we do this after every move, if you can notice. After every move we're going to ask ourselves the same questions. With his last move, what can black's idea be? So one of the ideas, maybe he's trying to bring his rook to d8, and another one could be that he's trying to play e6 or e5, and I think particularly e5 is what would be more of a concern to us.
Mhm.
So we look at his ideas and pick the most concerning one, from our point of view, the most like undesirable one for us from a positional point of view, and we can try to prevent it. So this next move, it looks weird, but after we discussed a bit what black's plan is, I think you could find it. What do you think white played?
Is it e5?
It is not e5, no.
Darn.
That is giving a bit too many squares
Okay.
to black.
So what could it be?
Similar idea with the with the pin earlier.
I thought so, yeah. So bishop h4.
Bishop h4, exactly. So this is what happened in the game.
Cool.
And it's a very strange move, which you likely wouldn't find otherwise if you weren't having this whole prophylactic thinking process. And once again, I wouldn't be confident if this is the absolute best move, and the something that the computer would pick as well. But prophylactic thinking is part of it's a human process, which we always try to make our opponent's job a bit harder. So bishop h4 is very logical. So now if e5 ever happens, we have bishop g3, which is a really great resource, and we're going to create this weakness, or maybe even win this pawn on e5. So now black has to go for a calmer plan and to not have as much space, and to play it with e6. And the way we continue this, now that we've prevented most of black's counterplay ideas, which were related to breaking open the center with c5 and e5, now that both of these are prevented, we can focus more on our own goals and just develop our pieces, put them onto better squares. So for the next few moves, it was mainly just improving pieces, a few repetitions, and now h4. Yeah. So now let's look at it from maybe black's point of view. After you see a move like h4, you obviously know what white's idea is. So my question is, would you prevent it, or would you let it happen?
In general, I think people tend to prevent it, and because letting it happen is, it's just getting a bit too chaotic, although it doesn't always work. But maybe it's a bit too far into the game yet, but I still think a lot of players would play h5.
Right. And this would, I think, keep up the fight more than what happened in the game. In the game, black didn't prevent it, and it looks like a very obvious move to make. And h5, you can. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have found it and would have at least considered it.
Oh, yeah.
But what is interesting to me is why, when you look at games like that, you try to think why it didn't happen, because of course missing the idea of h5 is impossible. Of course, it could be predicted, especially since strong players are playing this game. And I think it's partially can be explained by this drawback principle, is that he of course, saw h5, but thought it made more weakenings than it actually helped. So the whole weakening of the dark squares here, and you give the knight a nice post on g5, or maybe the bishop is going to come to g5, and he didn't want to let that happen. He didn't want to deal with any potential g4s later, and this could be a reason why we sometimes reject good defensive moves like that.
Okay.
Well, in the game, we can see what happens when you allow h5, and the answer is that it's pretty much a losing position. The bishop then came back to h4, so twice bishop h4 was a great choice. And once this f file opened up, it turned out to be not so favorable for black, because white's pieces are just a lot more harmoniously placed, and the bishop came back to this diagonal. The knight is going to come to c5 or to e5, and the rook can go to a7, and it just looks like a great position. And it did not take white too long to convert this later into a win. So yeah, the main point was to showcase that sometimes, even out of the opening, you can start using this principle to stop some of the opponent's opening ideas. And once you see that they don't have any more big pawn breaks or big positional changes, that's when you can take a calmer approach and slowly start improving your pieces.
I tend to have this often in an opening when there is a castling which can be prevented. So you even take some steps to prevent the castling, and that often helps the position.
Yeah, that could be part of it too. So we have one more example like that, which could be similar. This is probably the more complicated example out of all of them. And this one was played in the candidates between Andreikin and Zappalov, and it was a very interesting game. And you'll see why I'm saying this. It was similar. It was similar in a prophylactic way, but this is already a different pawn structure. So white is currently up a pawn, and his next move makes sense. He played knight b3 to defend it. So this came from a queen's gambit where white, I guess, gave up the bishop on f6, and then black had c5 played, and white just captured it, and black ignored it for some development. I'm just explaining why the pawn is suddenly just extra on c5, and I think that is most likely the reason why. So we can do this once again after every move, and I'm just trying to reinforce the idea of how this thinking process, how you can achieve this thinking process during your own game. And of course, this is more relevant for classical or rapid games rather than bullet and blitz, because there you don't have time to. You don't really have time to think about all of these things for too long, but it should still be a process that goes on in your head, even during your opponent's time. Do you have that process ever during your, let's say, blitz?
I have. Do you hear the background noise clearly, right?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Well, somebody had the great idea to just use the driller right now, kind of one floor higher. So apologies for that. That wasn't planned at all. This is why I was looking like a bit irritated.
Oh, sorry. I'm not hearing it at all.
It's really loud, so it's a bit funky. Anyway,
okay.
Back to your question. Can you repeat it one more time, please? I was interrupted. So
yeah, I was asking you. Do you notice that you have this thinking process whenever you're playing, whether it's blitz or rapid or classical? Do you actually engage in this thinking process, or do you mostly just think of moves?
Very good question. So I think I do mostly think of moves, but it might happen that I have this prophylaxis thinking too, but I couldn't define it into words or my own language before. Because, sometimes, of course, there is a situation where you are using a certain thought process to, defend or advance or something.
Yeah, so I think it's different for everyone, but I definitely think it's really, really useful to talk to yourself during the game. Like all of these questions over and over. What does my opponent want? What is his main idea? What do I want? Can I combine these two? Like just talking to yourself like that during the game, and it will help you just understand what you're doing better rather than just purely calculating moves. For some people, I know people for who calculating moves works perfectly. They don't do any of this, and they just have a perfect calculation abilities, and it's not necessary. But I think for most people it really does help to have a thinking process like that, and ask yourself these questions, because it will just make you feel more confident about what you're doing, and you will just feel like you understand the position better. So that being said, we're going to do a similar thing here after every move. So we're going to just analyze the moves from our opponent. When we see a move like a5, what is Black's idea and how do we prevent it?
Black wants to checkmate us. Black obviously wants to attack the knight, which is still defending on c5. So how do we prevent this? We have a couple of options, I guess. We could either try to... Actually, we don't have that many options, do we?
Yeah, we don't.
So I think a4 is almost one of the only moves I can just see to prevent further
Right. So here, this is where we think, do we need to prevent this idea or do we let this happen? And the way we do that is, well, we obviously have to analyze a4 and think about, does this create more weaknesses, or does the strength of it overpower it? And the other important thing on prophylaxis, it doesn't it's easy to mistake it with, I always have to prevent what my opponent is doing, but it's not. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to prevent all of his ideas. It's just being aware of them is sometimes good enough, and whether we prevent it or not, we just decide on a case-by-case basis. So here, I like the move a4. I personally would play it, but there were other options, and it wasn't necessary. But for example, playing something like, let's say, bishop d3, just a normal developing move, we would have to give up the pawn on c5, and but on the other hand, we would get to castle earlier, and this gives some other type of advantage. So it really depends on, during the game, if you consider this threat significant, if you consider it dangerous for you, then that's when you decide in the specific position whether you want to prevent it or not. So a4 is what you suggested and what was played in the game as well. So now there's no more a4 planned for Black, and he has to go for something different. Then b6 follows up. Well, here it's a fairly obvious moment what Black wants to do. I think here we can all understand that Black is trying to take our pawn, which is why we have to deal with it, and we push the pawn forward. Yes. So this wasn't as much of an important moment. So now this is where, well, ideally we would have seen this before playing a4, but one of the drawbacks of the a4 move was that our king gets a bit stuck in the center, and that there's now this bishop b4 check, forcing us to decide what to do with our king, which is not a very pleasant choice. The reason is, if we go back with the knight, I'm a bit worried about moves like knight c5. I was even thinking about knight e5, but I do think knight c5 is better. And now there's things like bishop f5 and knight d3, and then, well, this pawn is hanging. So a lot of these things combined just make us think about our king's safety a bit more. So this is why in this situation, guess what Andreikin decided to do with his king?
Probably move it to d1.
Right, to d1. Not e2 would be a little too crazy.
That would
so
be
d1 is right. E2 wouldn't work because
the queen is lost, right? Yeah.
So king d1. Now the king is in the center. Looks strangely enough, but the center is sort of closed. So there's no open files, which is still dangerous. But this is where the weighing of the positives and the negatives comes into play. So you weigh it out, you see how much you try to assess how much danger you will be in and whether it is worth it. So after knight c5, so this is getting complicated. Try to look what you think black's ideas are and whether that would be favorable for you. So one of the things of prophylaxis is, for example, so now he just played knight c5. He's offering a trade of knights. Is this trade of knights favorable for us?
If somebody's trying to force it, then my first instinct is no, it might not help. But maybe it's a terrible player, so then I would think, hey, I have a chance. But then again, I think Vesselin Topalov has some knowledge. Anyway, so let's take a look. Taking on c5 is probably not very helpful because it closes up the position for white. The pawn on c6 is lost after the bishop takes back. And not lost.
Bishop b5 is still possible.
Yes, exactly. But then the bishop is bound to b5, and
what I don't like is that then it gives the d4 opportunities to black. And
that too.
The center opens up. So this is how we can assess both options. So the opponent wants to trade. Do we prevent that idea or do we let it happen? And here, since we decided that we would rather keep the knights, here's how we get to our next move, and we play knight bd4. And this is what happened in the game. So where I'm just stopping at every complicated moment during the game, which is pretty much every move. This is how middle games are played. It's pretty much every move. But the game continues with knight e4, and this is where it gets even more tactical. So this is an important moment. What are black's ideas, you think, and what should we do?
f2 is a nice spot to go to if the queen would move away.
Right.
Well, the spot is just brilliant for the knight. So I mean,
it is actually, this is an inaccuracy that black did. Bishop g4 was better, even.
Oh.
So this was considered a mistake by
them,
but it's not. I wouldn't think of it as a huge mistake yet.
Okay. Well, I thought the knight is pretty good shape there. What else does it do? Not too much. It has a good position and is looking at f2.
Yeah. So what do you think could be the prophylactic idea for us to play?
Definitely not bishop to e2.
Yeah.
It might be a bit more, but we could go to d3 with the bishop and attack the knight and try to get rid of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Bishop d3 makes sense. He played bishop b5. Also a good square for the bishop. I think both of them are good squares for the bishop. You're just developing the bishop, and here it's also protecting on c6 another time, and maybe some c7, bishop c6 ideas for the future. So he played bishop b5, but what he missed was the strong prophylactic idea, which you didn't see either, which is very, very difficult to see. But you mentioned this f2 square many times, and the way how we can sort of make this idea less powerful is if this wasn't a check, then maybe we can think in some lines, maybe we'll sacrifice it, maybe we don't have to worry about it as much. So playing king c2 or king c1 is one of those prophylactic moments that you could just do. There's no tactic yet, which means we have an extra move where we can prevent these things. Also, if you would have said h3, I would have considered it the right solution, because it is also one of the solutions to one of black's main ideas, which was to play bishop g4.
Okay.
And h3 would have also been right. But of course, developing the bishop is not anything horrible. So next move, g5 happens.
Oh, yeah, this is something to...
Now this is more tactical, and definitely black has an idea. And
so this is the whole point. Yes, of course. So once the knight is attacked, the retreating the knight is very difficult. There's basically only the last row, because every other spot for the knight, it gets just taken away if the pawn goes to g4. So the knight would have to retreat to G or E1, and
And
that
well, there is
means
also the problem on f2.
exactly. That means the queen has a free pass now for this whole line, and can defend the knight on f2. Yeah, that's brutal. Oh, terrible! This reminds me of games which I played, and something like that happens.
But I'm gonna tell you right away, g5 was very much criticized later, and it was because it didn't work out. It was said to be, this is just like you sabotaged your own king. But for this to actually take place, we will have to find the next prophylactic ideas for white.
Well, of course, into mind comes h3, but maybe then there's
h3, and that's
h5.
exactly it.
Okay.
It's quite simple when you think about it. So the fascinating thing I find about prophylaxis and this sort of, and getting yourself into the right thinking process, is that it's so much simpler than you might think it is.
Okay.
It's not always that deep. It's just the opponent is playing g4. Is that significant? Is that a significant threat? Yes, it is. So I have to defend against it. So what are the ways to defend against it? h3. Or do I defend f2 instead and play rook f1? No, that looks passive and it lets him do more ideas. He's going to play g4. Knight will have to go back. It's too passive. So I'll play h3, maybe open up the h file. That's all it takes. All of this process takes 10 to 20 seconds. And once you incorporate it in your games, you'll see that it's so much easier. But it is, of course, it's not always as simple. I'm oversimplifying it a bit. But yeah, so Black, of course, follows up with his plan.
That's
h5.
What I was afraid of.
So now we can make another prophylactic move, which we have previously talked about.
Ooh.
And this one is more based on tactics. But now here's where we think. Is it possible to prevent g4?
Well, yeah, but of course oh yeah, it is. Yeah, I think we can. Well, let me think. g4 takes. And bishop e2, maybe. No, gosh, no, it's not working. No.
Yeah,
no,
it just all looks like it's falling apart.
It's terrible. Yeah.
So that's how we arrive to the conclusion. We cannot prevent g4. And the next step is, how can we best prepare for it?
Okay. So unfortunately, we also cannot castle anymore.
Yeah.
And oh, wow, that's very interesting right now. Okay.
It's a move we've previously talked about, so you should have at least an idea of...
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, no. What was that? Bishop d3?
No, not bishop d3.
Damn. Oh, wait, what? What do we do here? Have you found it out at home? Do you know what's being played here?
I think it's very hard to find the move, but because you have a hint that we've talked about it earlier.
Oh no, why don't I recall this hint? Oh.
So g4 is happening no matter what. Things are opening up.
Yeah, not good. So, I don't know. Are we going to c1 with the king now?
Yeah, we are going to see
with
the king. Well, where is the next question?
Well, c1, right?
c1, yes, c1. Yeah. So king c1, I think this is a good example of...
it's an amazing example.
Of prophylaxis that goes on here. So you want to, once again, you just make sure that there's no line where knight f2 comes with a check. You make sure that your queen is more or less safe, but this one is more tactical than it was positional in this case. So after g4, h takes, try to find the point. The next move is just mind-blowing. Well, not once you see it, it's gonna look so simple.
Oh,
So we still can't move the
no.
knight.
I want to find this move now.
We still can't move the knight. So let's
So
play
how about we?
positional.
Okay. So what if we go to b1 with the king?
Exactly. So this is
That's really cool. I love it. Okay, I got you.
I find this
understand.
maneuver really, really cool. So yes,
Yes,
the point was king b1. We couldn't have moved the knight regardless.
I understand.
So we just want to open up an extra file right now on G1. And
Why is this always happening to Veselin Topalov? My goodness,
I think I know. I love him as a player, and I think the reason why it happens is because he plays pretty interesting chess. Like he allows these ideas to happen, and he also has a lot of great games himself. So
absolutely,
he's just an interesting player, which is why these things occur.
Maybe it just happened too often in the recent times, but it's really funny because every time I'm seeing Veselin Topalov, I think like, okay, he will win a game now. Nope. No, he's the person who is losing this again, probably. Looks very good for white.
He created a lot of immortal games, and
indeed.
So this didn't happen in the game. G4 didn't happen because of this exact reason.
Also, okay.
And well, the point is that now we recaptured, so we're down a piece, but this knight is not allowed to move. Wherever it moves, there's going to be mate on h7. Yeah. So cannot move there, but can move to g5. And here's where the next amazing move comes in.
King a2.
King a2, exactly. And the rook is going to g1, and the black king is just doomed. So in the game, bishop c5 happened, which didn't prevent us from, which didn't prevent Andreikin from following up with his nice plan of king b1. And this is what I meant by the whole idea of prophylaxis being at the same time preventing the opponent's ideas and following up your own. So this king maneuver with king c1, king b1, king a2 happened next, and it's already basically a winning position. But we, at the same time, we made sure the king is safe, so we got him out of the center because we predicted that black was going to start opening things up here on this side of the board. And at the same time, we combined it with our own ideas. And one of our own ideas was, well, we need to, if we looked at this earlier, then this rook is out of play, and it can't really make a rook lift, and it's a bit stuck. So in just a few moves, at the same time, we made our king safe and freed up the space for the rook, and which is why this whole g4 plan wasn't possible, and it was an important tactical detail, even though the rook might never come to g1 now if it's closed, but it was an important tactical detail to deal with because it prevented black's plan of pushing g4. So then the rook ended up coming to d1, king f8 happened, and here we have yet another prophylaxis with...
You know what's happening now? The black king is going to b8 now.
Yeah, he really liked the idea, so he's just he's trying to do the same thing. No, but he just wanted to... The thing is, black is still trying to play g4, which makes the king there a bit vulnerable. And here was another prophylactic move, rook f1, just to make sure that if g4 does happen, we're prepared for it. Cool. And it didn't end up happening. They all maneuvered a bit with their kings, and what ended up happening is that this whole g5 and h5 plan ended up being more weakening than good, and white ended up winning here. I think the game even... I'm not sure if the game even ended here or went on a few moves, but it looks like a very much unpleasant position, and black is going to lose at least something here. So these were my examples for what prophylaxis is and how you can think about it during the games and what questions you can ask yourself during the games. So I'll stop sharing the screen, or do you have any questions about this?
No, you've explained this fantastically, and it's very, very good to notice this. I mean, I knew about it always, but I didn't really get the points yeah, and the smart moves
Mhm.
behind it. So
Yeah,
it's
but I'll tell you, even the trap of only thinking of moves, even I do it during my games. Like when you see the position, it's automatic to start thinking of moves and forgetting to talk yourself through them and realize why you're doing this and why you're prioritizing calculating this line over this line and
mhm.
thinking about it more, putting yourself more into the opponent's shoes is something that I forget all the time, and it can happen.
It's
But
interesting, yeah, because of sometimes those king runs where they have castle to one side and then there's a lot of pressure on this side. And sometimes a player can actually sneak out the king and go to the other side. I don't think it's
mhm,
always working, but sometimes you have those spaces left and then you make 5 moves only with the king to get on the
mhm.
complete other side, and it changes the game dynamic, and
Yeah,
the
I find
prevention
those
is
games
very good.
amazing
Yeah,
whenever
absolutely.
that happens.
Thank you so much for your smart move, Svitlana. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and we will see each other soon again. Have a lovely week. Bye bye.